Hi, I'm Bill Doherty, and on behalf of me and my co-author Steve Harris, I'm happy to give you an introduction and overview of our book on discernment counseling. And you can see links and as we go through and the cover and all of that. So what this is about then is giving you help with a particularly difficult kind of couple presenting for therapy. And that is what we call a mixed agenda couple, where somebody is leaning out of the marriage, or we think of marriage in terms of a lifelong committed relationship. So leaning out of the marriage and very ambivalent about trying to work on it in couples therapy. And the other person is leaning in. They want to preserve the relationship and they are eager to do couples therapy. So this is a not uncommon presentation for anybody who has been doing couples counseling for quite some time. And so if you are a couples therapist, you run into these couples all the time. The challenge is that our existing models of couples therapy assume that both people are there with at least a basic motivation to work on the problems and see if they can preserve the relationship. When you have somebody with what we call dual ambivalence, and that is they are ambivalent about staying. In fact, they're usually leaning out but haven't made a final decision. And they are ambivalent to reluctant to do the therapy. And you have the other one who's in the opposite corner. You have a challenge to engage them with all of the knowledge and skills you have because you don't have an agreement about what they're there for. And so this has been a perennial headache for couples therapists, and it certainly was for me for many years in my career. I've done couples therapy for 40 plus years. And discernment counseling is a protocol specifically for this kind of couple. It's a pre-couples therapy approach. And it's a protocol, 1 to 5 sessions, and I'll explain it. The book explains it, of course, in detail. So whatever your model of couples therapy is, this potentially could be useful for you when you see a couple who are not yet ready for couples therapy. So what the book does is give an overview of this at the beginning. We review some of the research background for this approach and the theoretical background, and then we walk you through it in some detail, and I'll describe it a little bit more as we go through what the book covers. But that's what the essence of this is. If you have challenges, as almost all of us do, with a particular kind of couple that we call a mixed agenda couple, then this book gives you tools. It gives you concepts for working with this kind of couple. It gives you tips if you want to go on and really specialize in this kind of work. So we begin with the overview. I'm giving you some of that here. And we deal, as I said, with the theory, and then we dive into the specifics. So let me give you a thumbnail version of what you will be learning, the protocol that you'll be learning in this book. First of all, the goals of discernment counseling are not to improve the relationship. They are to help couples have clarity and confidence about a direction for the relationship based on a deeper understanding of what's happened to the marriage and each person's contributions to the problems. Let me go over it again. Clarity and confidence about a direction based on a deeper understanding of what's happened in the relationship and each person's contributions to the problems. And as I said, notice the goals are not problem solving. They're not greater intimacy, learning to communicate more. It's to figure out where they want to go based on better understanding where they've been and each person's contributions to the problems. It's really important, we stress in this book, to be clear with couples about these goals, because they're sitting in front of you in a couples therapist office, and everything about that suggests that you're going to be helping them solve problems and improve the relationship. And we point out in the book that you can't fall into the trap of starting to do that. Because if you start to work on, teach them how to problem solve better, teach them communication skills, do some things like enactments where they become closer to each other. The danger with that is that you're proceeding with the treatment when you don't have an agreement with the couple that they want to be treated. Okay, so describe the goals. The focus of the conversation is not about whether to stay married or divorce, period, but rather to stay married or carve out, whether to divorce or to carve out a period of 6 months or more in which they would do couples therapy to see if they could get their marriage into a good place. So we put this in terms of 3 paths, so focus on 3 paths. Path 1 is to stay the course, neither divorce nor do couples therapy. Path 2 is the separation divorce path, in which then they're going to proceed to divorce, and there can be resources you provide them. And path 3 is a 6-month commitment to couples therapy with divorce off the table and with a clear agenda of what each person is going to work on to try to improve the relationship and self. So 3 paths, that's the focus. And again, it's not to make things better now. In fact, we often tell people, don't figure it's going to make things better now, but what's the direction you're going to go? Now, because they are a mixed agenda couple, they're going to come in with very different takes on these 3 paths initially. And so the process, the structure of discernment counseling is quite different from couples therapy, where for the most part we see people individually, as a couple. And so most of the conversations that go on in discernment counseling are with the individual partners. So I'll give you an overview then, and this is what the book goes into chapter by chapter. There is an assessment, a telephone intake in advance to see if they are appropriate for this service. You want to make sure that you don't have somebody who is so far out of the relationship they're really ready to divorce, and they're hoping to bring their partner along. That's not an appropriate use of discernment counseling. The possibility of working on the marriage has to be on the table. So you want to make sure you have a leaning out that's not all the way out. You want to make sure in your individual intakes that you have a leaning in who's willing to put some effort into the relationship. And we also have a domestic violence screen. We have other kinds of things we teach you about the intake process. So once you've screened them for appropriateness, then we have the chapters that go through the various sessions. And so the first session, they come in together. It's 2 hours. The subsequent sessions are an hour and a half. And what we teach you is a very specific structure for that first session, in which in the first 40 minutes or so, they're in the room together as you go through a series of questions to elicit their understanding of what's happened to the marriage, what kind of help they have tried before, how they think about the role of children, if any, in their relationship, their decisions about the relationship, and other questions while they're together. And then you talk to them each separately. And so often you would start with a leaning out person, and you're trying to understand their divorce narrative, what has led them to conclude that a divorce is the only real good possibility, or certainly leaning towards that, and what else they are experiencing in the relationship. And you're looking, even from the beginning, to help them with a broader narrative of the relationship problems, and to begin the process of helping them look at their own contributions to interaction patterns that have gotten them in trouble as a couple. You're going to be asking at some point along the line if they want to do a second session, because this is the other thing I want to emphasize, that we have the 3 paths, and then we talk about 1 to 5 sessions. And that is, they're only committing to 1 session at a time. So this is here for the leaning out to be able to put a toe in the water to come into that first session, not committing to anything further. So at some point, you're going to be asking them that they want to come back. Session by session, the decisions get made, whether to continue. Then at the end of that individual conversation, you help them formulate a summary of what they've learned in the conversation with you. And then they deliver that to their partner, who comes back into the room or the Zoom space, and with no further commentary. And then you talk to the other person, in this case, the leaning in, and you're trying to help the leaning in position themselves in such a way as to increase the likelihood that their goal, which is path 3, the therapy path, will be achievable. So you're trying to help that person understand the pain and the reasons why their spouse might be wanting to leave them, so that they get past a defensive posture. You're also trying to help them not pursue, not scold, not make a lot of the mistakes that people with this sort of a wound of being threatened with abandonment often behave that way. So then they do their summary. And again, you ask if they want to do another session, and then there's a short wrap up. So the structure of the next sessions goes in a similar fashion, and that is a brief check-in at the beginning, followed by talking with one summary, talking to the other summary, and then finishing up to the maximum of 5 sessions. So it's a very different structure. It's very intense and intensive. The rationale for the brevity of this is that they're on the brink, and you want to help them figure out how to get off the brink, or they could also choose to stay on the brink with path 1. So that's the overview you get, and then the chapters drill down specifically in details about how you handle the middle sessions, the later sessions, how you handle helping people make a transition to the therapy path, to path 3. And there you don't just say, well, okay, they've decided, they're leaning out, has decided they wanted to do therapy. There's a whole session that is a transition to therapy, where you help them identify their personal agendas for change, the things they're going to work on in the couples therapy. One of the reasons for discernment counseling, in fact, is to prevent half-hearted couples therapy, where people sort of say, well, I guess we'll give it a try. There's no real energy for it. Discernment counseling, if it's going to end with them doing couples therapy, it ends with them actually writing down and agreeing to how they're going to proceed. And then you can refer to yourself, if you will. You could be the couples therapist, or you could refer out for that. There's a chapter on handling the decision and the transition to path 2, which is the divorce one, which is, of course, usually a very difficult kind of experience for in couples work, and a very methodical and sensitive approach to handling the likelihood that only one of them wants a divorce at this time, the leaning out, not the leaning in. And so how do you sensitively handle that and also provide them resources and offer them follow-up? Then path 1 is a situation often where the leaning out can't really make a decision. They're not up for therapy. They're not ready to divorce. And they're looking for a holding pattern, and their partner leaning in is willing to do that. And so you help them really negotiate how they're going to be present with each other in the relationship with the immediate threat of divorce off the table. So there's a whole section of the book then, after the introduction and the theory and the research, a whole section going through these in detail. And then part 3 is some of the common scenarios that are challenging when couples are on the brink, that we believe that discernment counseling has unique ways to deal with. And so one of those, for example, is when there's an affair, and how to handle in the discernment counseling a past affair that's not been healed yet. And I'll give you just a little tip there. Because they're not in therapy, we don't try to do the healing in discernment counseling. But we see if they want to do that healing work and what that would take in the therapy. That would be an example that we also, discernment counseling can also handle an active affair that's going on now as you work with the leaning out partner, who's usually the one having the affair, about whether they want to end the affair and commit to therapy in path 3 or not. So you can handle in discernment counseling because you're not asking them to show up and be vulnerable to trying to change and heal the marriage. You can handle active affairs in discernment counseling in a way that you really most of us don't try in couples therapy. Another chapter is on a situation when the feelings are gone. When the leaning out is saying, I'm no longer in love with this person. They're a very nice person. We don't have a lot of conflict, but my heart isn't there. Well, how do you work with that in some very specific ways? And then a chapter on how do you transition from regular couples therapy to discernment counseling when people come in ostensibly because they both want to work on the marriage, and then you find out that somebody is really on the brink, and that they are really a mixed agenda couple. We have a protocol for how you transition, with their permission, from working on healing and problem solving and reconciliation to discernment counseling. And so discernment counseling becomes a tool for how you work with ambivalence. It's really, in many ways, an ambivalence protocol, where you don't try to use everything you have as a couples therapist when you don't have both people who are customers for that, who are ready for that. And then the final section of the book is on putting this in practice on the ground. How do you learn it? You'll learn a lot of things in the book, but it's really hard to fully practice a very disciplined, detailed protocol just by reading the book. And so there's other ways for you to learn discernment counseling we talk about. And then increasingly, there are people who are building a specialized practice around discernment counseling. These would be couples therapists who really like this. This is like emergency room work. It's very intensive. It's short term. And so our last chapter is, if you're really intrigued by this, you get this extra training in this. How might you set up a specialized practice where this becomes the main focus of your work? So that's an overview of the book. This is we have lots of cases in the book. We have a chapter that's really a full-length case with excerpts from the transcripts. We have lots of very specific, how do you frame things, a whole bunch of different kinds of examples. So it's I think a richly detailed clinical book that is grounded in some good theory, an emerging research base on discernment counseling and on divorce ambivalence. And I think you'll be inspired by the stories of the couples, by what it takes to work with them. As I said a minute ago, this is like intensive care work, or it's emergency room work. So part of what therapists tell us when they learn this model, and you'll see in this book, is to allow yourself to move more quickly with getting in and helping people with their dilemma, and helping people look at themselves as part of what's happened in the relationship, getting in there more quickly because it's an emergency, and there's a lot at stake. And so if you want to read a book about whether or not you decide to practice discernment counseling, this will, I think, teach you a lot about this kind of couple and about strategies and skills for working with people who are in serious trouble at the brink of divorce, trying to figure out what to do with a key life decision. So I hope you enjoy it. And there's all kinds of links and that you can look at and learn more about the book.